Hey everyone, Zach from thebarbellphysio.com, and today we're talking about CrossFit injuries. We're going to break down two research studies that looked at CrossFit injuries, where they happen in the body, as well as how frequently different areas of the body get injured so that we understand this sport a little bit more. Before we dive into that, I know when you say CrossFit injuries, the first thing that pops up in everybody's head is, oh, it is dangerous. Or if you're somebody that's in CrossFit, you probably understand that it's not that dangerous. And I'm just going to get this out of the way. We have a lot of research studies at this point that look at injury rates in CrossFit. And what they have consistently found is that when you compare that to other recreational fitness activities, the injury rate is pretty much the same. What we're going to look at today is these two research studies. The first one's called From Sweat to Strain, an epidemiological analysis of training-related injuries in CrossFit. And the second study is Retrospective Injury Epidemiology and Risk Factors for Injury in CrossFit. My favorite part of these studies was this graph right here. So what they did was they asked these CrossFit athletes what their motivation for training was. And to see that 33% of people, more than any other answer given, was the prevention of health issues. And really, that's what we're all about. That's why we exercise, is so that we are fitter and healthier and we improve our quality of life. And it's just amazing to see that many people in CrossFit to try to stay ahead of those bad things that happen when we aren't recreationally active. And I hope we can all appreciate how huge that is to see in the research. So these two studies surveyed a lot of CrossFit athletes to try to have a better understanding of CrossFit related injuries so that we can work towards reducing those. While CrossFit's not more dangerous than other sports, obviously anything we can do to reduce the risk of injury in any sport is a good thing. So what both of these studies actually found was that the shoulder and knee were identified as the primary locations for the highest number of injuries. Other studies have found the shoulder and low back being the most frequently injured, but I really say that between the three studies that have looked at this, it is shoulder, knee, and lower back. And that really makes sense when you look at CrossFit programming. A couple years ago, I wrote an article for CrossFit Journal where I looked at an entire year of CrossFit.com programming and found that over 80% of their workouts involved a shoulder-related movement. So that's just a lot of volume and frequency of shoulder-related exercises. So that makes a lot of sense. Second to that, the knee. In CrossFit, we tend to squat a ton. And so the squat obviously puts a lot of stress on the knee. That drives some positive adaptations, but at times, if we do too much, that can drive negative adaptations and lead to pain. And then finally, the low back, which makes sense with how much heavy lifting is done in CrossFit. A few other interesting finds that they had in this study. Greater length of participation in CrossFit actually increased the odds of being injured. Basically meaning that athletes that have done CrossFit for a longer period of time got injured more frequently. Kind of your explanation there is if you've been doing CrossFit for longer, you are probably doing some more advanced movements. And so that might mean that you are possibly getting injured a little bit more frequently as you make that transition from more of a scaled athlete to an RX athlete. Another one that makes a lot of sense is that competitors did have a significantly higher risk of being injured compared to non-CrossFit competitive athletes. That makes sense because, again, those athletes are doing much higher skills, much heavier weights. They're training at significantly higher frequencies, which has also been shown to be related to CrossFit injuries. So they will get injured a little bit more if they are a competitive CrossFit athlete. But having worked with a lot of highly competitive athletes and games level athletes, I will say this. Your competitive athletes, because their tissue fitness is so high, they tend to recover from injuries really, really fast relative to those people that aren't as fit. Another interesting finding was that individuals that engage in physical activity outside of CrossFit were more likely to get injured than those that just did CrossFit itself. And finally, both taller athletes and athletes with a higher overall body mass were more likely to get injured. Don't have a great explanation for that other than maybe just say that if you're taller or bigger, you're probably seeing a lot more force put on your body when we're talking about some of the body weight movements like a kipping pull-up that are so common in CrossFit. The final thing that I want to discuss from the Sweat to Strain article is that they actually surveyed their athletes and asked them about what exercises resulted in injuries. And the first one surprised me quite a bit. It was box jumps were the exercise that resulted in the most injuries. Number 2 on their list was conditioning. Now, they didn't break that down anymore in terms of what they meant by conditioning, so I don't have any more specific data for you on that. Number 3 was the snatch, which I think a lot of people can understand, a highly complex movement where we're moving a bar through a large range of motion really fast. Does make sense that the snatch would be pretty high on that list. That was then followed up by the bar pull-up and the clean being tied, then running, and finally deadlift and squats. So then after that, there were a bunch of other exercises, but really we need to be thinking from an injury perspective. The barbell lifts need to be coached really well in CrossFit. We need to really have good form on our kipping pull-ups to mitigate injury risk. And then finally, we need to be really smart about box jump programming or our performance of those as an athlete, and make sure that when we're getting really tired, we're still not over rushing those box jumps. We're paying attention to our technique, even on those lower skill movements. So I want to wrap this up by talking about what do we do with this data? So we know that the shoulder, the knee, and the low back are the three most commonly injured areas of the body. To me, when I see that, that means that when I'm working with an athlete as a physical therapist that wants to get back to CrossFit, or if I'm coaching in a CrossFit gym and somebody reports that injury history, then I need to be really sure that the movements that challenge that joint have perfect technique. And we also might want to be prescribing some accessory work to strengthen those joints up. So if you're looking for a done for you accessory work, you could check out our Bulletproof Back Builder, our Bulletproof Quads program, or our Bulletproof Shoulders program at performanceplusprogramming.com. The second thing that we want to be considering is those exercises that cause the most injuries. Your Olympic lifts, your deadlifts, your squats, and your kipping pull-ups. We need to make sure, whether we're a medical professional, whether we're a coach, whether we're an athlete ourselves, we need to make sure that our technique on those movements are absolutely dialed in and perfect, and that is also going to help reduce our risk of injury with those.